We've seen the images through the years, thousands of people from war-torn countries or people who have been persecuted because of their race, religion, nationality, or belonging to a particular social group, or because of political beliefs. We often see lines of people walking toward what we are led to believe is a chance to come to the United States. The reality is that while those lines of people wanting to get in are still long, the numbers being allowed in are smaller than ever. Joining me this morning to talk about how the United States Refugee Resettlement Program has changed in recent years and how it ultimately impacts the United States, Dr. Kelsey Norman, who is from the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University, where she is a fellow for the Middle East and director of the Women's Rights, Human Rights, and Refugees Program. Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
What was the attraction for you to study this area of concern?
After I finished my undergraduate degree, I had the opportunity to go work in Egypt, where I also volunteered at a refugee school. So I knew that there was a large refugee population in Egypt. And later, when I went to do my PhD, I was very interested in this idea of refugees, of refugee resettlement, but also for refugees that don't get to come to countries like the United States.
So when you're talking about your undergraduate degree, what was that in? What was your focus at?
Political science.
Okay, so it just kind of morphed and went to the international study, so to speak.
Right.
You just finished a book dealing with the Middle East and North Africa. What was the tone, what was the focus of that book?
So again, it's on this broader topic of refugees, but also irregular migrants who don't get the chance to come to countries like the United States, like those of Europe, who are instead sort of more or less stuck in countries that are thought to be just transit countries, but in reality they're host countries for thousands, millions of migrants and refugees.
And we in the United States sometimes are not as smart as we should be about that process, because the refugee process does require, if you're going to come to this country, you have to go to a different country first before you apply, and that can take a long time, can it?
It can, yeah. So most refugees don't end up residing in countries like the United States, like Europe. They end up coming to a neighboring country, which they might be able to escape. First of all, being able to escape your home country is not, an unchallenging task. So just being able to leave a country like Syria and arrive in a country like Turkey, like Jordan, like Lebanon is difficult unto itself. And then once you're in that second country, the reality is that most people end up staying in those neighboring countries. It's only a very select few that would ever be chosen for a process like resettlement, less than 1% of the world's refugees.
I've found that to be a staggering number, less than 1%. I know in our country, there have been a decreasing number of people being allowed in the country. Under this administration, I know some of the numbers from previous years, from 2016, 17, and 18, the numbers have gone down each and every year from 85,000 to 53,000 to 22,000. You wrote an article recently about the fact that 22,500 represents fewer refugees allowed into this country than have been allowed into Canada.
Correct.
Which is a big transition. Not that we should be competing with Canada for this sort of thing.
But we're a much larger country.
Right.
So in theory, we have a greater capacity to take in a larger number of refugees.
You would argue, I assume, that having refugees being able to come to this country is not a bad thing.
I would absolutely argue that it's an important part of our democracy, of our moral stature in the world. Since 1980, we've had an important resettlement program that resettles the largest numbers of refugees every year. For almost 40 years, 4 decades. There was an important dip after September 11th, 2001, where we didn't resettle as many refugees in the subsequent years. But since then, those numbers have been extremely high. They were at a peak in 2016, the last year of the Obama administration.
Right.
And then since President Trump came to office, those numbers have been steadily declining, with a new cap of just 18,000 people planned to be allowed in fiscal year 2020, which would be an all-time low.
Now, there are those who would say, well, millions of people voted for President Trump because of what he was articulating about this, putting up a wall at the border, the refugee program. But refugee and asylum programs are two different things, are they not?
Correct. I think that right now, under the current administration, I think both programs are really under attack. So refugee resettlement is a very different process from seeking asylum. In order to claim asylum, you have to be within that country's borders. So you have to be at a port of entry, like along the southern border with Mexico, or you have to be within the U.S. territory. So that's a different process, although it does rely on sort of the same criteria in order to eventually be recognized as a refugee. But the resettlement process is much smaller in scale, but it's also incredibly important, and something that we've considered a priority for, again, 4 decades. And I think that ending that program really puts so much pressure on other countries, such as those I mentioned, Turkey, Lebanon, other neighboring countries that are doing most of the work in terms of global refugee hosting.
It does become a political football, does it not? Because there are those who would say, you know, us first. We don't care what's going on in Turkey. So what? They got pressure. That's on them. We'll just go ahead and close our borders off, and that's the way it's going to be. This is in terms of this country being a world leader. Do you suspect, because you've just come back, you've seen what's going on in other parts of the world, how are we perceived as a leader in this category, or are we not anymore?
We were until very recently, and I think this is, you know, as someone who spent some time in the Middle East region in various countries, it's difficult sometimes to see the ramifications of some of the U.S. foreign policy choices for that region. But within this specific topic of refugee resettlement, we really were perceived as a leader, and it was, you know, an important aspect that made me feel proud to be an American citizen. The fact that we cared about this process, that we cared about resettling those who are most vulnerable amongst the world's refugees. And now I think that, you know, we can think about the global ramifications that this will have. You mentioned Turkey. We should care about what happens in Turkey with Syrian refugees. Right now, Syrian refugees are being deported from Turkey to northern Syria, which is already causing secondary displacement within Syria, but also to neighboring countries like Iraq. This is a region that we only just basically pulled out of militarily, and that we're already seeing greater instability as a result of our own actions.
Well, we're going to continue this conversation on Houston Newsmakers Extra. For those of you who want to join in, you can do that. Go to our website, click2houston.com, and we will talk more about this program of resettlement that seems to be dwindling and what kind of impact it means for the country and our community. Dr. Norman, thank you so much for coming in. We'll continue our conversation on the other side, on the web, if you will. Good luck. When your book comes out, let us know. We'll put it on our website.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Sell, #1 on the list, right?